So I'm going to turn it over to Darren, who, if you've done this before, you know the drill. If you haven't, that it's our opportunity to introduce a drink, but it's also a way for us to make sure that we're telling you about another part of our industry, another industry in our city that's really struggling, and that's restaurants. And we want to make sure that you're aware of places that are open, because I think it's as important for you to patronize us as it is to patronize other businesses to keep them open. So Darren, take it away.
Always more important to patronize us. But anyway, having said that, so today we're at Inside Out, which is in Hillcrest. The address is 1642 University Street. It's that big, giant, very modern looking red building that you may have seen, just went up a few years ago. This restaurant is called Inside Out because it is both inside and outside, which is how they've been able to stay open, at least until this point, which is really exciting and wonderful. It's beautiful inside. Joey, could you pull up those first two little pictures we want to take a look at? Liz, my contact, was kind enough to take pictures for me, and this is what they look like right now. So, I mean, come on. If you want to get into the holiday spirit, there you go. Go on to the next picture, Joey. This is the interior of what you look out onto. And as you can see, it's open, and there's people that live there. I always say you have to be a bartender or a hairdresser to live there. I certainly wouldn't. Well, there was a point in my life when I certainly would have. And there's a pond in the middle, and there's water coming down, and there's the most wonderful bartenders. So Joey, let's go back to that. And we've got Michael, and Michael is my favorite. I will be honest about that. He's a wonderful bartender, and it is near the house, and we go at least once a week, and I love it very much. And they have been able to keep a lot of people employed. And Michael, how have you been managing that? You've got quite a setup for the COVID restrictions.
I've been managing this bar since we opened. We've been open since May of 2018. So it's been a little over 2.5 years. And it's just a wonderful, fun environment. We have wonderful food. We have an extensive wine list, great craft cocktails, and the ambiance is above all in Hillcrest for sure.
It is, and you've got plexiglass up between patrons and between tables, and even sitting at the bar, you're still protected with.
Yeah, when it comes to the safety precautions, we do a temperature check at the door for everybody. Masks are required. We don't allow any kind of socializing except for the group that you came with. We always do contact tracing, so we prefer reservations. We have an email and a phone number for everybody. So in case of some sort of event happens, we can make sure we get in touch with everybody who was there on that day to make sure everyone stays safe.
Very good. Yeah, they are very much playing by the rules, which is wonderful and gives you great comfort. And again, I can't express it enough. If you want to get in the mood for the holidays and feel like you're someplace on vacation, go there. So Michael, we were originally going to do a very summery watermelon drink, but we're not. We're doing a rum-based drink called Freaky Tiki. So what is this Freaky Tiki?
So unfortunately, the watermelon vodka is made by Ciroc. It's only available for a limited time through the summer. So because we're out of stock of that, we're going with something called the Freaky Tiki. It's our version of a Mai Tai. So it's a mix of different rums, a little pineapple juice, some house-made sweet and sour. So I'll just walk you through it real quick. This is a cute little cup that comes in, a little parrot. Let me get some ice real quick.
I think it's worth it just for the glass, to be honest.
So this is just a filled over ice type of cocktail. It'll start with 1 ounce of the Sugar Island coconut rum, sort of similar to Malibu, just a little bit more small time craft style. Next, we'll do 1 ounce of the Mount Gay Black Barrel rum. This one's a little bit deeper, bolder, richer, slightly darker rum, so a little bit more rum flavored. We do 1 ounce of that. Next, we have a Priscilla passion fruit liqueur. It's got a nice, sweet, sort of tart, fruity flavor. Kind of what makes our Mai Tai a little bit different than some of the other traditional Mai Tais you've seen before. So we do 1 ounce of this. next is going to be Jafar's Orgeat. Orgeat, if you're not familiar, is a almond liqueur, or almond syrup, I'm sorry. So they basically toast sliced almonds and then soak it in a simple syrup so it absorbs that almond flavor. We don't do quite as much of this. We just do a half an ounce of this one. Next, we'll do 2 ounces of what we do is a house-made sweet and sour. So this is basically just lemon juice, lime juice, and simple syrup. So it adds like a nice sweet yet sour flavor, sweet and sour. So 2 ounces of that. Next, we top it with some pineapple juice. We're using Dole. Use whatever you want. So 3 ounces of the pineapple juice. And last but not least, we'll top it off with a little bit of the Kraken. Kraken is a really nice, dark, sweet rum. Really nice addition. You can add as much or as little as you like going into COVID. So if you need to keep yourself busy, a little rum always helps. So we just float it right around the top. And then garnish it with a slice of orange.
There it is.
Freaky tiki.
That is beautiful. And thank you so much, Michael.
Absolutely.
That's awesome, Michael. Yeah,
Cheers,
thank
everyone.
you very much. Yeah. So, Michael, if people come in now in our Christmas season, they can look outside and see your beautiful display behind you. But they can also have this beautiful summer-ish cup. Drinking.
Absolutely.
That's
we
awesome.
have a wonderful, wonderful atmosphere. Basically, we're on the inside of an apartment complex. So the sky, if you can't see it, is all open up here, and it's just surrounded by a bunch of towers. We have a wonderful water feature, a nice little pond in the middle, so you still get that summer vibe, even though it's Christmas. But we have all the Christmas decorations, so
Awesome.
right there and beautiful.
So I think that if you haven't been there yet, I go quite often because I live nearby. It's kind of like the quintessential San Diego restaurant because it's got this modern vibe. It's also excellent food, very, very good food.
Yes,
but you can dine outside in this beautiful terrace space they've got, and you can dine inside, which has an outdoor experience because the back behind Michael there is all open. So you see the waterfall behind him. You're inside and outside, inside out, right?
Absolutely.
So anybody that's not been there, you really should try it because it's great food. I took someone there recently who works for another arts organization just to have a drink. And he got there before me and he was like, what is this place? This is so amazing. So you should experience it if you haven't. Yeah. Michael, thank you very much.
Absolutely, everyone. Stay safe.
Happy holidays.
You too.
All right, everyone. Cheers. Happy Aperitivo, as we always do. Oh, nice. The bird's drinking with us. Well done. Okay, so on to Aperitivo. You know, as I said earlier, this like research that we've been doing and learning from other organizations that being connected is what we are all really seeking. And it's also what I said from the stage at Bohème, the communal experience is what is important right now. And I think doing this, the more we think about this as a communal experience, the better we are. One of the things I've been trying to think about is how we also make sure you know everyone on our staff, because you're getting to know Darren really well now, right? And you're getting to see who he is and his personality, which is all great. And, you know, that's really important. And so many of you know Alan, but you don't know Alan. And I was thinking, you know, we had a really good conversation the last time we did an aperitivo with Katura. And many people said to me that was so educational. So it's like, people probably really don't know all the things that an assistant director and a director do, but also somebody who's on staff. And so I thought about Alan, because Alan directed what, after today, I've got to say, fingers crossed, we're still going to be able to pull off. You may know that the governor has made some new restrictions, and we're not quite sure how that's going to affect us. But we hope that we'll still be able to do what we announced, which is a screening of the film version of what we did 2 years ago of All Is Calm. which Alan directed. So that's the reason Alan is with us today. So Alan Hicks, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you with us. And your official title is what now? It's changed. So what are we calling you?
Resident stage director and director of opera theater at San Diego State.
So that is a slash. And one of the things that was really interesting about hiring Alan was it started off with a conversation with me, between me and Joyce Gaddis, who many of you may know, who's been at San Diego State forever. And she at that point was dean of, what is the school?
The School of Performing Arts and Professional Studies, PFSA.
It's a weird name. So you got professional studies and performing arts together, but Joyce was the dean of that. And she's a supporter of the opera. She's attended forever. And she said to me, you know, look, we've had kind of a revolving door of people that are running our opera program because we can't really give enough to make it a meaningful full-time experience. And I said, well, we can't give enough to an assistant director to make it a meaningful full-time experience. So why don't we just pool resources and try to create some kind of dynamic relationship between San Diego State and San Diego Opera and share this person. And Alan was the person that we wound up selecting. And we're going to come to that later, but I think that in and of itself, it was certainly newsworthy when it happened because there's not a lot of relationships between a university and a professional opera company that has the potential to make it incredibly dynamic between the two. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but Alan, I always like to start this because the point of this is to let people to get to know you and who you are and where you come from, where your background is and all of that. So tell us about where you're from, where you grew up.
I grew up in Mississippi in a little town, well, it's a medium-sized Mississippi town called Columbus, which is only noteworthy in that it's halfway between Tuscaloosa, Alabama and Starkville, Mississippi. But it does have an Air Force base, which is why I grew up there, because my father was retired Air Force.
Oh, interesting. So that would not be a place that one would imagine is a hotbed of interest in opera.
None whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I was just recently writing something about, I like to call Mississippi the arts-free zone. Not that there's not art there, it's just that it's not supported in any real way by the state or by, and their organizations that pop up there just struggle their entire existence to sort of produce things. The opera company, Mississippi Opera, when I was growing up, did 3 full shows a year. Now is down to doing 1 performance of 1 show a year.
Wow. Well, that's very interesting because that is a reflection of the industry in general. Because if that was a example of what that kind of community did, that was also amplified up to San Diego and to many other communities of the kinds of performances and the frequency of opera that happened. I know I grew up in Kansas City, which people wouldn't think is a necessarily big opera city, but there was a big opera company that did a lot of stuff. It was all year long, right? And that's changed too. The whole industry's changed. So were you involved with the arts as a child? Were the arts part of your life?
Strangely enough, I think I was searching for something when I was in elementary school. I played football, I played baseball, I played basketball, I did all of the sports. And then at some point, a friend of mine joined the band, and I was like, well, I'm going to join the band. And so I picked up the trumpet and started at the age of 11, I think, and started playing the trumpet. And about 2 years later, I switched over to French horn, and that's where I started to really become interested in. I wanted to be a music teacher. I was going to be a band director in the state of Mississippi, and the way things progressed is I got to college and wasn't really having fun playing the horn anymore and wasn't as interested in it. And I had been in musicals since I was in high school. And I thought, this is how silly I was. I thought, well, somebody told me I could sing one day, so maybe I'll just be a singer. And so I went to a voice teacher's office and sang for her. And I asked her if I could study. Well, I said, am I any good? And she didn't say you're good or you're on your way or whatever. She said, you can study with me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it started. And from
Spoken
then
like
on,
spoken like a true voice teacher, right?
exactly. And, but it was a seminal experience because it changed my direction completely. I I went to graduate school in performance instead of education. I completely changed my desire to be a teacher, or a high school teacher, to wanting to sort of follow this professional performance career as long as it would take me. And then I thought to myself, well, I love teaching. I'll always go back. I can always go back to teaching, but I want to make sure that I know what I'm teaching. So I want to try to have a career first.
So your undergrad was in music education?
Choral music education, yes.
Wow. So and then you moved into, and that's not so unusual. That happens a lot. Happened to me. I was a what's my music literature and history undergrad, and then I started singing because I wanted to be a music critic. I had a double degree in music literature and history and journalism, and at a certain point, I started really wanting to sing, and I was studying more aggressively, and I was getting cast, and suddenly you just shift your path, right? So that's what happened with you. You moved towards vocal performance in your master's degrees. Is that what happened with you?
Yeah. Well, I auditioned for graduate school as a performance major, and my sort of my approach was, I'll do this until someone says no. And I applied. I picked 4 schools. I said, I'll apply to all of them. I'll audition for all of them. If any of them give me a scholarship, I'll go. And that's how I ended up at Rice University. And
Wow.
Rice was, at the time, I had never even heard of Rice. And I had only auditioned because my sister lived in Houston and told me I should. But it was a very good experience. It was a performance degree.
Yeah.
And I had, I was sort of dumped into all of these things that I had missed out on as an undergraduate, like language study and diction and getting on stage in opera. I'd been on stage in musical theater. I'd been on stage in theater, but I'd never been in an opera before. My first role was Chouinard. So that was, kind of when we were doing Bohème, I was always catching myself singing along with Bob because it's so stuck in my head. But then, I did the same thing at the end of graduate school. I said, well, I'll apply to all these young artist programs, and if any of them give me a contract, I'll go. And I sort of continued my singing career that way, until someone tells me no, I'll just keep going. And fortunately for me, my first contract came right at the end of graduate school. It was Chautauqua Opera. I was in the studio there. And then the next year what did I do? The next year it was, I think, Virginia. And I think actually Virginia Opera is where I met Bruce Stasna. And that was nearly 22 years ago.
Wow.
So 1998, I believe, was the year. And then I went to what's Opera Saratoga now. It was Lake George at the time. And then I went back to Chautauqua as an apprentice artist. I did a little bit of a tour with Minnesota Opera the following year. But I started to, I was living in New York at the time. I was starting to be told that as a baritone, my career potential was limited, but as a tenor, my career potential was wide open, which of course, you hear people say you would be an amazing tenor. You have to switch. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that it's not like turning on a light. It's to me, I've always said to people, tenor is not a real voice type. It's a party trick. It's, there's so much technique and trickery involved in being a tenor. And I mean, that's why tenors, you talk to them, they're so technically oriented because their voices basically are based on it. But yeah, so that's when I decided to take a couple of years off to try to retool. And in the meantime, I took a job teaching at the Actor Studio Drama School, which for those of you who don't know, in the early 2000s, Actor Studio Drama School was part of the New School for Social Research.
At NYU.
And yeah, or no, it's actually the New School.
Oh, sorry.
And
Right.
yeah,
Manus New School. Yeah, I think.
yeah.
Right.
Manus is part of that too. And there was this TV show called Inside the Actor Studio with James Lipton. Well, a lot of people didn't know, but those forums were actually forums for the students because James Lipton was the dean of the Actor Studio Drama School. So James Lipton was my boss for several years, and so I'm often in those audiences listening to whomever happens to be talking. But then I also took a job at an acting conservatory called the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And the American Academy of Dramatic Arts is probably the greatest acting conservatory that no one's ever heard of. No. That's American Musical and Dramatic Academy. ADA is AADA, and it was the school that produced Robert Redford, Grace Kelly, and their ilk. It was a Sanford Meisner school. Is they taught the Meisner technique, and that was also a seminal thing for me because I was still trying to work as a tenor, but I was starting to find that I was much more interested in the storytelling. And about that time, I had applied to graduate school in directing at Indiana, but Vincent Leota, who was the director of the school, the director of opera at the time, said, "I'm going on sabbatical, so you're in, but just wait a year." And in that year, I decided I didn't want to live in Bloomington. And so I went back to the drawing board and started looking for doctoral programs because I already had a master's degree and I didn't want to go back and spend 3 years in school and get another master's degree. I wanted to be done. And so I was looking for a doctoral program in opera directing, and that's how I ended up at the University of Texas.
Wow.
Almost 10 years to the day after I graduated from Rice in singing. So there was a bit of a hole in there.
For those that don't know, Rice is also in Houston, so you'd sort of come full circle back to Houston. I think now it may not have been the same situation when you were there, but I think that Rice has one of the best voice teaching faculties in the country. So there's excellent voice teaching at Rice. It may have been the same case when you were there. But one thing I think is very interesting that you just shared is the exact wording that Katura, who was our last Aperitivo guest, used, which is the movement. She was a dancer, you were a singer. What made the choice to move from those kind of performative careers to directing was storytelling. Like what you really were interested in was how do I move into a career where I'm telling stories, right?
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, and analyze, the interesting thing I find, and I write a lot about this because I'm also a writer, and one of the things that I think people lose sight of is that opera starts with words. The libretto exists before the score exists.
Right.
And the score is there to convey the words. So we often lose sight of what the words mean. And if we go back and look at the words, even operas that were written in the 1700s still have relevance today. And if you tell them in such a way that connects the audience to that text, you can actually, it's a much more transformative experience as far as I'm concerned. And that's what I'm trying to do is I'm looking at the words and I'm trying to figure out how I can use the words and what the composer gave us to really have a transformative experience, an emotional experience. And just recently, actually, at San Diego State, we did Perry's L'Euridice, the very first opera that's still extant. And we did a double bill of that and sort of a cut down version of Orfeo e Euridice, the Gluck. And one of the things that I was very interested in doing, because it's a trouser role, the Orfeo is a mezzo soprano typically who's singing the role of a young boy. I decided to make her. And so we had essentially, or well, I didn't actually say this, but my idea was she would either be non-binary or a woman. And so it would either be a lesbian relationship or a relationship between two women or not, one non-binary and one woman. And so I didn't change any of the words. I didn't change any of the storytelling. All I did was not change the gender, not dress her as a man.
Right.
And I feel like sometimes just a small change like that will open up that, will connect that to someone in the audience who might not have seen themselves on stage before.
Wow. So that's very interesting, because what we want, the ultimate goal of an opera company, is to have people experience opera in a way that they see themselves, right? So you don't want it to be alienating and distancing. You want it to be a place where people feel connected because they see themselves. That's a great point. So you just talked about SDSU. So let's, interesting, you're like, are you reading my notes that I have written down? Because that's what we're supposed to talk about. So you're in this interesting relationship where you've actually done a fair amount of teaching at universities, and you've also been on staff of opera companies.
Right.
Have you been in a role where you've connected the staff of an opera company as an assistant director and the teaching role in university? Has that happened before for you?
It's not, because this is actually a unique position in the entire country. I mean, there are a couple of universities, less than there used to be, but there are a couple of universities in which there's a connection to the professional opera company through a young artist program. So there are students who are getting a master's degree who are also in the young artist program, but usually the opera director at the school is not really involved in that.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, and that's one of the reasons that this drew me to it. I mean, for those of you who don't know, I was at the University of Houston as the associate producer and assistant director of opera there when this position was advertised. And the thing that interested me in it was the connection of the profession and the academic curriculum. And one of the things about the University of Houston is, as much as I loved it and as wonderful as the work was and the students were, there was no time for me to be involved in the business at all. Right. And so it was built in. I mean, it was baked in. And so I didn't have to struggle to find time away from the school to go and direct a show at a company or say no to a bunch of people because I just couldn't fit it in my schedule. It's baked in, and it's a good balance for me.
So we spent, for those of you that are listening, we spent a lot of time trying to conceptualize this role and how can we make sure that it is shared and it's balanced, that it gives real time, because it's not just time, it's actually for you as a professional, your experience as a resident assistant director, resident director, assisting other companies or directing small roles for us, which is important for you, and your time to direct the opera program at university, but how those two things can actually enhance each other. And I don't believe we're quite there yet in how they can enhance each other. We're only a few years into this, but I think it's remarkable that we were able to craft this. So, and also find you. You were like the perfect fit for this. I want to let's show a video, because I got some videos and projections and projection designs, but also I have two videos. Let's start off. Before we do this, let me set this up. So you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned Minnesota before. Were you there as a singer?
I was. I did a tour there in 2001.
Right.
Yeah.
And then after that, how did you become involved with Minnesota Opera as a assistant director, associate director, whatever role you were in?
Well, interestingly enough, I will say this: it was my time at Minnesota that set me on the tenor path, because Dale and Floyd at the time, as I was leaving, they wanted me to sing for them for the season, and they said, we really think you're a tenor. You should. And so that kind of set me on this path. So I have to give them props for that. Maybe not the way they intended, but it certainly worked out for me. I was directing a show. I mean, I always had a good relationship with them. And when I was directing a show at Seattle, actually, this particular production of Ariadne was at Seattle. And it was, the director had actually rented the set, but weren't going to rent the production.
Minnesota.
Minnesota. And so, but their director, once he saw the set, he didn't know what to do with it, so he dropped out. And they called me and asked me if I would do it, and I said yes. But I did say, you know, I mean, this was only about 3 months before rehearsal started, and I said, I really do love this production. I don't really. They would have let me do my own thing, but I told them I would rather just remount it. Now there were my own little takes on a lot of the things that happened, but I tended not to mess around too much with what Chris Alexander had done, because I did love what he had done so much.
So this is an important point, because I don't think our audience necessarily knows this, that when we rent a production, like with San Diego Opera, many of you have seen our Pearl Fishers, that's the Zonder Rhodes, right? So that is a thing. And when someone rents it and they pay us for it, we intend to give it to them to use as a whole thing, meaning that there's generally a director who has first right of refusal, meaning that it's not going to change. The staging is going to stay the same. The relationship between the characters is going to stay the same. The choreography is going to stay the same. So it kind of migrates from one company to another, with the whole conception being relatively the same, right? So you were involved with the production in Seattle, and then it moved to Minnesota, and you became the director, right?
The director, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There was and there's an interim point, actually. In April of the year previous to that, I was hired by the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, which is one of the most storied chamber orchestras in the world. They were making a foray into opera, so they wanted to do a semi-staged version of The Turn of the Screw. And when I was there, I met the stage manager, who at the time was the stage manager for Minnesota. So as soon as the director dropped out, she immediately thought of me and called and said, "Are you available? Because I want to put your name in." So that connection, yeah.
All of this happens. So I want to show everyone, if you don't know Ariadne Naxos, I would just hope that you guys learn to love this opera. It's absolutely one of my favorites. I want to bring it here, but I want to make sure that we have an audience for it. And this is a very beautiful performance of Zerbinetta, part of Zerbinetta's aria. And we'll talk about what you actually asked Aaron Morley to do in this, which is kind of remarkable. Aaron Morley is a beautiful coloratura soprano, but this is a piece of Zerbinetta's aria. Joey, can you show that, please? so it's pretty remarkable that she was doing, it was E, is it E natural or F? I can't remember, like the high note where she sits forever. I think it's an E natural, I'm not
I
sure.
think it's an E, yeah.
Because
I
I
don't-
think
I
what
can't
winds up
remember.
happening is in the original Ariadne, it's up a whole step. So it's F sharp, maybe. Anyway,
Mhm.
I'll ask Nick about his, Nick will know. Nick's shaking his head. But regardless, that's like one of the most treacherous notes when she just laid on her elbow and just floated this note out. So I got to ask you, was that baked into the direction, or is that something you helped her release that kind of singing?
Well, of course, Erin is just a stunningly talented soprano. I mean, one of the most talented all around people I've ever met. And when I first approached her with this, the idea of that moment is her discussing this love, and we had the piano there. Interestingly enough, the piano is on stage because, for those of you who don't know the show, this sort of wealthy homeowner, master of the house, decides he wants all of these different ensembles that have gathered together to do an evening of entertainment. He's decided there isn't enough time because there's a fireworks show at 9 o'clock. So he wants them all to be done at the same time. And so the serious opera and the Commedia dell'arte have literally are intruding on each other the entire time. And so the piano, they start basically this director, who's the dance master, actually decides to just use whatever they have available. So the whole thing about Ariadne is that she lives on an island, and Bacchus has to come and rescue her from this island, but she's entirely surrounded by water. So they actually row towards the island on this big piano.
Ah!
And so that's why the piano is there. And one of the when we started working on this aria, we had done a lot of this laying over the piano and playing with the hair of the pianist and all this kind of stuff. And she was obviously she was a little bit reluctant, but I think that singers tend to find release
Yes.
in
Yeah.
letting their bodies go,
Yeah.
especially in those sort of treacherous moments. And I think when she tried it, she was like, oh, this actually makes it a little easier.
That was exactly the word I was going to use. Like somehow you gave her a sense of release, that she was able to go up into that high note by putting her body in a really supine, easy position. And she just like wrapped herself open, and that high note and it's, for many people listening to this, like high notes can be really horizontal, which is painful, or also sort of still contain some roundness. That note goes up and it's very round and very beautiful. It seems very natural for her. And I
Yeah.
just look at what you asked her to do, and it seems like it was a release of everything that made that sound so beautiful. It's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. The video cuts out right before she actually jumps onto the piano and is standing on the piano. And of course, when you're on stage and there's a pit in front of you and you're standing on a piano that's standing 5 feet above the ground, and then you're on top of that, that's a pretty scary place to be. But she stands up on it, she does all the ending notes that way. She throws a rose, and she just does a whole thing. And it was, for her, I think I always tell singers, unfortunately, I used to be a singer, so most of the singer excuses don't work on me. But
Yeah.
I always say, try it at least twice, hopefully 3 times, and then if it doesn't work, we'll do something else. We'll figure it out, or we'll find it. But if you try it a couple of times and it still doesn't work, then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But usually I find that they'll try it once and they'll go, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought it was, and then they get more comfortable with it.
So I got to ask if anybody wants to raise their hand. Like when you listen to that music, it's very evocative, right? Like, would that be something you would want to hear in San Diego? We've never done Ariadne auf Naxos in the history of this company. And we've not done much German rep. We've done some Strauss, but not much. So that would be interesting to hear. But also, when I listen particularly in that aria, it's like chamber music. There's so much exposed solo instruments, which I think with our orchestra, who has such talented first chair players to really feature them. It feels like chamber music. I'm dying to let Ariadne happen in this city. So Linda is saying what? Something. S. I don't know what that means, but maybe that's yes. Anyway, if that was a vote of confidence, we need to move on because I've got not so much time left. So I want to just talk a second about another skill that you have, which is projection design, which is something not particularly usual for a singer and also not for most directors. So you're also a designer. So Joey, can you just pull up some of the pictures? Turn of the Screw, right?
Yes.
And that was where?
This was at a festival in Miami. It's changed its name a few times, but I think it's now called the Miami Classical Music Festival.
But what you've done here, if you guys know Turn of the Screw, it's a Britain opera, it's a ghost story, it's amazing. But you've created architecture that looks like a set through projections. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. And one of the ways that we did that is to use, instead of using a flat projection panel, we created several panels of differing sizes, and then we put them on different line sets. So some of them would be a little bit further back, some of them would be a little bit further forward. And even if you project a flat image onto that, you still get the idea of depth.
It's brilliant. And that's a video is not always a cost-effective alternative. Projections are a different world. So this is really smart. It's like a really smart use of resources to give you structure and depth and character to the space. That's great. Can you pull the next one up, Joey? This is fun. So this is a magic flute, which I think is very interesting. And so you've got projection of kind of the, I don't know, iconography that we know of magic flute, but you've also got projection of super titles as part of the set, right?
Right.
Talk about this.
Well, so one of the things that's always driven me a bit crazy is often the audiences have to break their concentration on the stage to look up and see what the translation is. And so, and I was talking to a friend of mine who I work with a lot in these types of productions. And I said, one of the things I want to do is I want to make the super titles part of the set. So we're going to do this 100% projected magic flute. We had a concept that sort of led into that projection. And I said, so what I want to do though is add the super titles in. So if you have 5 people spread across the stage and they're each saying something different, anyone who's ever read the super titles knows that you're not reading everything that's happening because it couldn't fit on a thing. But you could literally put every single word that every single person is saying above their head. And the great thing about these super titles is it followed them from place to place. So if they walked across the stage, the super title would then appear on the other side. So you're always watching the stage or the action as opposed to looking up and missing whatever's happening.
That's super cool. So they're really part of your field of vision.
Yeah, we also used fonts that went along. We had like a font leitmotif. So each person had their own font and each person had their own, we had this very comic book when the 3 ladies kill the dragon, the snake or the dragon at the beginning, the serpent. There's this like pow, wham, Batman kind of thing with cartoon stuff. And it just sort of played right into that, the whole motif. It was a 1980s MTV fantasy concept. So everybody was a different personality from early pop music in the 80s.
Ah, that's brilliant. Yeah. Okay, Joey, the last one. And the reason I wanted to show this is because if any of you have been to an SDSU performance before, and we'll talk about the challenges in just a second, it's fraught with challenges and budget, a variety of things, but the performance space is also incredibly challenging. And this is an SDSU production. This is the Perry and the Gluck, right?
This is the Perry, the first half. So this is the Perry.
So, but what you did with really, I would not imagine incredibly expensive resources.
Mhm.
And you hung some beautiful gauzy fabric and you filled it with some beautiful projections. And of course, you costumed everyone beautifully, but that's like a really evocative look for, I've never seen anything at SDSU that looked like that, I gotta say. I've only been here 5 years, so I don't know what happened before me, but really beautiful. Yeah.
Well, and that's part of the thing is that we could spend all of our money building hard set pieces, but for the money that we have, we would end up building a wall, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And so what have done since I've been there is, as much as I can, use different fabrics. And this particular fabric is called voile. It's very inexpensive. I think that entire sheet cost us less than $200. And then we just hung it, and of course you can see it's draped. It's hung in fullness. And so it has a little bit of texture to it. Those images, which you can't really tell, they move. So at the time when Daphne comes in to tell Orfeo that the story about how Eurydice was bitten by the snake, there's actually a very slow moving snake that sort of crawls through that takes up the entire space, and it just very slowly moves across the thing. So there's this alive quality to the set.
That's beautiful. Before I forget, we have a chat comment from Gretchen about the fact that the Met has a streaming, I think one of the best performances of Ariadne of Naxos, 1988 production, which I've seen a million times with Jesse Norman, Kathleen Bettel, and Tatiana Troyanos. That's Saturday night starting at 4:30. So if you have Met HD, please see it, because it's very different. It's a traditional Ariadne, but you'll see the shape of the piece, and there are remarkable performances in it. So take advantage of that if you can. All right, so we just talked about cost being a creative challenge, and you have a certain amount of money you can spend at SDSU, and instead of building a wall, you built something that could be projected on, was very inexpensive, and have a more evocative way to tell a story. We've handed you a series of challenges at San Diego Opera, haven't we, since you've been here?
Well, I mean, I've been more challenged in other things, but there have been, certain things that, when we talk about Aida, for example, behind me here, one of the biggest concerns, one of the most famous parts of that opera that everybody knows, that even people who don't know they know Aida know the Triumphal March.
Right.
And it's not, if you break it down to what's actually happening in the music, it's not terribly interesting. Even the ballet it's not his best music, but it was sort of a theatrical device for all of this sort of opulence, right? And so when you're doing that in a concert setting, the first thing you have to deal with is, how do we do the Triumphal March?
Right.
And so that's, that was a challenge, because we had really decided to do a very much I wouldn't call it low budget, because it wasn't, but just a concert staging. So you have to kind of think about, all right, this is the one time where there's supposed to be 40,000 people on stage, and animals, and people spinning fire and all sorts of things. And people know that. That's one thing that people just know about Aida, is it's big. When you actually look at the story that they're telling, it's not a big story. It's actually a very intimate, almost chamber opera story.
Yeah.
But there are these moments where there's so many people on stage, and so much chorus music, and this just bigness about it. So that was a challenge. How do we do that? And we looked at several different options, and what we came up with in the end was the big rays coming down. And it was one of those things. It was also, we had very little time. So sort of piecing through how to do that and how to, we went through a bunch of different options, and that's the one we ended up with. Yeah.
Well, so everybody knows that, opera is not cheap in any way, shape, or form. But time is definitely money in opera, especially when we're in the theater, because every rehearsal moment we have involves a lot of labor. And so when we're thinking about how to save money, and that was pre-COVID, but we knew we needed to cut the budget. So we knew we had a great cast for Aida ready. It's kind of like the Bohème we had this year. We had a great cast ready. So instead of just scrapping it or telling that cast of Aida to do HMS Pinafore instead, joking, like, how do we preserve that artistic thing that we have with that cast, but cut the budget significantly? And that's what I was faced with, and I handed to Alan. And when you think about Triumphal March aside, it is a small, intimate thing. And I would say that the only complaints we really had were around the Triumphal March, that they expected to see spectacle and horses. And I remember doing the talkback after, I do the talkback after every performance. And people would say, well, we really missed the elephants. And I would say, okay, raise your hand if you've actually seen an elephant on stage in Aida. And people would raise their hand. I'd be like, where? And of course, their hand would go down, because like, we've never done it with elephants. We did the Zonder Rhodes with a beautiful sculptured elephant, but whether that's really important to storytelling. So that's Aida. So you were also AD for La Bohème recently, which was another challenge. Like, how do we hand you some curveballs? So this was La Bohème. And you weren't directing it, but you also had to deal with how do you serve as an AD with all the distancing stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that was probably an interesting experience for you, right?
It was truly an interesting. I mean, I think we all have to remember that no one was. We were all over the country and all over the world trying to figure out how to do opera in this new scenario, and we were one of the first companies to actually do something like that. And the planning stages were stressful because there were all these unknowns, and the good thing about being on the staff is, is normally as an AD, I show up a week before, they tell me what we're doing and I do it. But I was actually in the meetings where we talked about these things and how they were going to happen and the changes that happen from week to week. And, it was a big question mark. And at the end, when you step back and look at what we accomplished, it was a fantastic show. But if you knew like how much we were winging it,
yeah,
it was even more impressive. I mean,
right.
Even looking at it on the video and thinking about, oh my gosh, even the video worked and as sort of the way it happened, and the singers were fantastic. And I have to say, 100% of that goes to the people involved, because from all the way down the chain, everybody just really threw themselves into it and made it happen. And when we had issues, we fixed them, or we found another way to do it. So yeah, I will say this, I girded for much more stress than actually happened.
Yeah.
When we got into rehearsals, I was a little bit like, I've been in more stressful rehearsals when you have a theater and everything is the way it should be. This is pretty easy. So
I have to say, I'm glad you said that, because I do think it's what I've been talking about with rigorous planning that led us to an end result with zero COVID. If you guys know, the people that are watching, we had over 300 employees and over 3,000 people watching and zero cases of COVID. So that's remarkable. But the reason that happens is with really rigorous planning, and Alan was involved in all that. So we spent a lot of time anticipating the challenges. You don't know whether you're going to face all those challenges effectively, but you spend time doing it. I want to show, so the last thing I want to talk about is All Is Calm, because that's what's next for us, fingers crossed, which Alan directed. And I want to show a clip of it. So I want to talk about it, like, what were the challenges that we handed you with All Is Calm? And then I'm going to take some questions. We're going to go a little over because we only have 2 minutes left. So I hope everyone can hang out for 5 to 10 minutes more, because I really want you to end with this very beautiful musical experience that was All Is Calm we saw 2 years ago, which we're bringing back. So I just want to ask you about like the All Is Calm we did in the theater, and what were some of the challenges we handed you then?
Well, it's a piece for actors and singers separately, So, and the actors tend to be trained in accents and voice and speech and speech projection on stage. And we were using singers who are not trained as actors. So the first thing we had to do was immense amounts of dialect coachings. Not to mention, there's about 120 different, if you really break it down, there's about 120 lines in the show, and about, I would say, 12 different specific accents. So people were having to do things they'd never done before.
Right.
That was the first challenge. And then the second challenge was actually the dialogue and the movement. The way the piece moves is very different than an opera moves. Opera moves, as a friend of mine says, glacially slow. And this piece moved very fast. From thing to thing. It was all based on the letters and the speeches and things that were written by the people at the time. So, we had to do a lot of that. Plus, the other big issue in the theater was that the singers weren't mic'd. They didn't have body mics. So getting them down to the edge of the stage so that I could help them project to the back of the theater in their spoken lines was really important. So when you're wondering why people are stepping out of the texture into these pools of light to have their speeches, it's because if I had kept them, at the back of the stage, no one would have heard the words.
Well, so I'm just going to say that is, as a general director, that's something that we hand to a director. Yeah, we can't afford to have a sound mixer and body mics. The mics themselves are not expensive, but the whole idea of mixing and all that, we just couldn't have afforded it for this. And we thought, well, the Balboa is a good acoustic space. We've got great singers. Let's do it without body mics. We had floor mics to give kind of an ambient sound. And so Alan had to think about positioning singers as an ensemble, because it's a very ensemble show in much of the choral music, but also pulling people out of the ensemble, right?
Mm-hmm. And keeping them close, because it's a cappella, there's no place to get your pitch once you start. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't spreading people so far away from each other that they couldn't hear each other. Right. And that meant I had to harken back to my choral music days and think about when I was a madrigal singer, how close did I need to be to the nearest baritone to keep the pitch steady? Right. And so, if sometimes it felt like it's not moving a lot of times it was because I was really trying to make sure that we maintain this very delicate harmonic balance, not to destroy the music, because if we destroyed the music, maybe the theater would have been better, but then the music would have been terrible. So we just were trying to find a balance in that.
So that's very interesting. So it's that very tight sort of trade-off between choral balance, dramatic intent, all of those things. And it brings us back sort of full circle to you being a music educator when you wanted to be your first career, right? Mm-hmm. Now you're a director, but you're thinking about that kind of choral ensemble you would have been considering. I have to ask, if I just want to look at everyone who is on the call, if you did not attend All Is Calm, wave your hand if anybody did not attend it. And you don't need to feel bad about that. I want to know if you did not experience it, because it was one of the most transformative experiences I've had in the quasi-opera world. It's not really an opera, but it is an opera. And anyway, I found it incredibly moving and effective, and so good for our community, because it's about military, and it's also about people giving to each other and forgiveness and a bunch of messages there, but it really felt important. So we're going to move on to All Is Calm, because it's time to end this, but All Is Calm, we hope, will happen on the December 21st. We have to sort all this out with the new directive from the governor today and what's actually allowed for the next 3 weeks, but it's a drive-in concept. And what we have opted to do is to have a small ensemble from our chorus on this venue that has been built at the Del Mar racetracks called Concerts for Cars. So we're moving into that venue, and it's a round stage with 4 screens above it, and you park cars in the round. And it was built for rock concerts. The Beach Boys did a concert there in the fall. And so it's sort of a turnkey thing, and we'll just move in for one night. But the idea is for us to amplify the beauty of what we did 2 years ago with All Is Calm, which is a beautiful production. And if you remember, KPBS shot it so they could have it shown live as a simulcast on KPBS. So we have that, but also amplify that with live performances of some holiday music sung by members of our chorus before a screening of the 2018 performances that Alan directed. And so I just wanted to leave us all with this really magnificent moment that is the singing of Silent Night. And if you remember, the story is people from opposite sides in the war come together on the no man's land, and they share singing and sport, and unfortunately burying their dead. And then suddenly they're thrust back into war after it. But the Silent Night moment is sort of the unity of all of the nationalities. Before we go into this, I forgot, I do need to give a second shout out to Inside Out and thank them for the drink today, and please patronize them. But we're going to be done here. So I just want to end with this music as we move into the holiday season and think about the beauty of the season, and particularly the beauty of the singing of this. And I hope if you don't have a ticket to this screening, one night only on December 21st, that you'll join us. So Joey, let's hear it. So it's really beautiful. Yeah. So if you didn't see it, or if you did see it and were able to do it on the 21st, please come back and see it. It's a remarkable piece. That's one of the most remarkable moments in it. I'm a little choked up about it because it's really beautiful. Barbara asks if that clip is available. It was filmed by KPBS live, and they do have rights to show it locally, and they usually do it on Christmas Eve again. So look on their schedule and see if it's there for Christmas Eve. They might show it again on Christmas Eve, but your best chance is to see it again on the 21st with us and support the opera, and also hear some beautiful singing that you can sing along with the chorus members. So thank you all very much. I think that's a great way to end. It's really beautiful, right? So congratulations to Alan for that great work. And thank you all. It was a long aperitivo. I appreciate you all staying with, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.